Okay, our next speaker is from our food sponsor. Thank you very much, Click ID, for that wonderful food. Food talaga eh, no? Food talaga eh. And he's a software engineer for Click ID. So to talk to us about Visual Studio productivity tips, please give a warm round of applause for Mr. Kenneth Reyes.
Thanks Bob, for that introduction. Hi everyone, good evening. So as I mentioned, I'm Kenneth Reyes from Blink. Well, Visual Studio productivity tips, medyo it looks like it's quite a big topic. We'll dive to a lot of things, but actually it's not. So we're just going to, most of the time, just a history or just some based on experience when you dive into an IDE, when you compile, when you build, that's it. That's pretty much it. And then you get used to what you're doing pretty much every day. And then you miss out, you're installing, Visual Studio usually takes what, a few hours to install? And you're only using how much of it in the span of whatever your developer, or in your developer life. So, given that, even if we have, I think, this particular demo, or I'll take this as a sort of a product demo, because it will just look at the features that we're missing out, or at least those that are uncommon. But there are some common ones that we're going to go through as well. So as mentioned, when using an IDE, is it enough to just be able to compile, or is it enough to just use it like a text editor? So why not use it for what it is? It's more than that. And that's pretty much the end of my slides.
Okay.
No. There's another one, and maybe we need to take a step back. So if you look at an IDE and you go back, you zoom out. It's not just about compiling. They also thought of how you write code easily, how you deploy, or how will you spot errors faster, and things like that. So I'll go through some of the items that I thought was things that we're missing out on, or things that are uncommon for us to use in Visual Studio. And the next one is, how many of you have used Code Snippets in Visual Studio?
I think I used before.
Yep. Okay. So I think based on the show of hands, it's not that common for everyone here. And then there's also the concept of creating our own code snippets. So in this one, so the code snippets is actually, it's actually an additional tool or a feature in Visual Studio. I'll just show you here. There's two ways to access it. So just via the menu, and then as well as for the keyboard shortcuts. So, and just a run through of the existing one. So if you've used it on C# or on JavaScript, for C#, there's CTOR, which basically just adds a constructor. It's better if I just show that to you guys, and it's not. Okay, wait. So let me just show that. So as a sample of how code snippets work, so let's remove this code. Just reset it to So by default, you have an empty class, and then code snippets basically just helps you type less. So you just need to type CTOR, as I mentioned before. Click tab twice, it will just create a constructor. So yes, it looks like it's a shortcut, or it looks like it's not useful, but when you're creating 10, 50 classes in one go, this should be, instead of copy pasting and then ending up typing the wrong class name. Yes. So that's one of them. And then there's also a lot. So if I mentioned in the slides that there's a Code Snippets Manager on the Tools menu. And then you can see there under the language there's several choices there. So for C# or for JavaScript. If you go to C#, that's where you'll find the ones that we've used already. So there's one for creating a class, there's one for creating a constructor, as I mentioned. And then if you want to also use it for statements. So instead of typing the if itself, so you just type there, and then it will just handle the condition. So pretty much, this should lessen the way you type, or the amount of time you spend typing redundant things, and helps you become more focused on the logic that you want to achieve. And so as part of the extensibility of Visual Studio, aside from them providing this, as mentioned, there's a lot of already pre-existing code snippets. You can also create your own. So what I thought of was most of the search I made for code snippets, they usually focus on C#. At least that's what's most of the examples. So I thought of what best to, if you're a front-end developer, or at least JavaScript developer, not necessarily front-end, there's a time that you mostly create closures. So is everyone familiar with closures? Okay. So, and it's quite a lot of parentheses and enters, and so I thought of why not create our own code snippet for that one. But before that, I quite jumped a bit there. So I'll show you first how to create a simple one first. So so this is pretty much, let me just, I'm just hoping it moves up. I can just open that. So there's already a predefined format provided by Microsoft for you, or the Visual Studio team, for you to create your own code snippet. So it's an XML file. One thing to note, it should end in .snippet. Actually, so with this one, so basically most of the first few lines and the last few lines will be the same. So what we'll need to focus on is actually on the header and then the actual snippet. So what's in here is just is that we're just saying. So if you looked at again the code snippets we have before, there's already one for alert. But what I'm doing right now is we're just replicating that just to show you how we can create our own. So I can save this anywhere, share it with my co-developers, and everything. They can use it on, they can import it on to their machine as well, or to their IDE rather. So so the important sections are the header. So basically the title, just for display purposes in the IDE, is UI. And then the shortcut will be, before we were writing CTOR. So in this case, we'll write JS alert, for example, because as I mentioned, alert is already an existing one. So we're just replicating. And then lastly, the actual snippet. So we have code here wherein there's a language that specifies. In this case, we're targeting JavaScript. And then this particular CData part here is quite just the standard format. So you have to surround it with that one. So right now, we basically just write alert hello world. So it's pretty static. So now we have defined our own code snippet. The next step is how will Visual Studio identify this, or how will we be able to use it on our own projects, or in our own projects. So in the same window, actually, Tools, Code Snippets Manager, you can just click on JavaScript, or actually, you don't have to select language. This is just for filtering the display. You can just go ahead and click on Import. So I actually already did that, so it will ask me if I want to override it, but I'd rather. So once you've selected the snippet file, you'll see the option on which folder to put it on. It already parsed what language it's targeting. It is targeting on. So it's JavaScript, and then I said just on the custom my code snippets file. Just click finish. Since I already imported this earlier, it will just ask me to either rename or overwrite. I'll just overwrite that. I didn't really change anything. So that's pretty much it. If you look here, there's already the JS alert. So that's basically just the header, the display name I added. If you want to add a description, that's another field. So I'll show later the page where you can actually find all of the information on how to create your own. So now that we have that, so that's those are the 3 steps. So define the snippet, help Visual Studio identify that you've defined the snippets or import that, and then use it on our actual code. So let's just open a random JavaScript file. So we already defined the shortcut as JS, capital A, and then LER. There. Click tab twice, and then you'll just see the actual. So this pretty much is still not that useful in terms of how code snippets are actually intended to be used. So in terms of the code snippets, you can actually force or at least imply that, hey, you should replace the message, because obviously you won't be saying hello world every time. So what you need to do is to actually, so going back to what I mentioned about the actual page where you can actually see all of this information. So there's the walkthrough here from Microsoft itself. So you have you can define a sort of a replacement. So they call it a replacement. So it will be templated on their end. So basically, you just define a literal. Let's define one here. So I'll explain it later. So it's the same place where the code snippet is. So and then you can type alert message. So the ID, sort of the variable name, and then the tooltip, since it will be sort of forced to the user that, hey, you should replace this, they can hover on it and then this tooltip will show up. So this will be and then lastly, the default will be the value that will be so initially we have hello world. So whatever you place the default, it will be there. It will be replaced the hello world. So that's the default message. So let's just say default alert message. So since I updated the snippet, so just a background on how the snippets work inside Visual Studio. So when you import it, they actually copy it to their own file or their own copy. So you have to re-import this one again. So I'll do that again. So just to be clear, so there's a declaration of a literal. So there's the alert message, the ID, the tooltip, and then the default. And I almost forgot to actually use it. So just add that here. So it will just you just have to surround it with the dollar sign symbol, and then what happens here is once you type the shortcut, it will end up with alert default alert message. So I'll just show that to you. And then just the same import process. And then once we're done, we can type it. So I'll just leave that one. Okay. Use it wrong. So let me just double check that. Wait, it should be here. Sorry, it should be beside the code, the same level, inside the snippet. I placed it on the wrong way. So let me re-import that again. So as you can see here, there's already a sort of a force thing here that, hey, there's the default alert message. It's highlighted so to indicate that you should be able to replace it. And then there's the tooltip. And then once you actually click, you can actually replace it with anything. So if you really want to say hello world, that's up to you. So yep. Sorry. Okay. So that's the basic one. So it all revolves around that concept of the code snippets. And then if you want to get more advanced, like I said, creating a default closure method. For example, so let's just, you actually don't have to have a declaration there. It's pretty much the same thing. You can actually have multiple lines here. And then, so basically, if you want to do that, and then maybe I'll just use the same. So basically, it's the same process. You're just changing the actual content. So I think you should have enough space there. So it's just the alignment and everything. So that's pretty much what code snippets are. So there's again, as mentioned, there's a lot of different types. So the if, the for loops, you can actually create your in JavaScript there. So there's the concept of replacing. So you can actually force to replace the variable names as well as the other parts of the condition or the loop. That's pretty much for code snippets. And then what's next? Yep. So So for the code snippets, we've discussed about the pre-existing and then how to create a custom one. So it's pretty much useful when you don't want to type a lot of things every time. So and then it also quite prevents you to commit the mistakes of untyping the small or mistakenly typing the small details. It's already very redundant for us. We seldom forget about using them because we know I can write a for loop anytime, anywhere. But sometimes things happen. So it's just for quick editing and stuff like that. And next. So this one it's pretty much I think this is a common one. I think it's pretty much used, but I think not everything, or at least we don't use all of them. So there's going to be a lot of keyboard shortcuts that we show you here. So this one are just the ones that I usually use, but I think there's are all of you familiar with these keyboard shortcuts? Have you ever used them before? So I think these are the common. And then if you sample it on an actual, so just a demo. So this one's mostly for C#. So one of the few things that people usually do if they don't, if sometimes they just paste code and they don't want people to see it good. It looks like this. So the most common one, I think the first shortcut that most of us look for is the format document. So it's just Control KD. Wait, doesn't follow that. So if you actually, so it just formats the entire document to a certain specification. And then one thing as well is the refactor or the rename. Usually when you want to rename a variable, you just click on Control R twice, Control R, and then you'll get on replacing the text. And then if you, for example, let me create an interface here. So for simplicity, I'm all just creating the classes interfaces in one project. Yep. So yeah, so I had a wrong spelling there, but I think one thing to show here as well is that if there's a newly born file or class or interface in Visual Studio and you didn't edit anything yet, if you rename the file, it will actually do the refactoring on its own already. It will actually ask you to rename because it's the first time you've edited the file anyway. In that sense, if you already reference that file in other, it will automatically be refactored. think one of my tests already. Let me just, advertisement lang muna. Let me just remove that. It's already showing lots of errors. We'll discuss this later. But anyway, yeah, so that's in terms of the interface or the renaming. Once you actually have multiple references to, for example, test is, let me rename that again. And then you can test interface. And then you basically can rename it from here, just the normal refactor, and then everything will be reflected. Obviously, the file name will not be affected because that doesn't really matter in the compiling process. So that's the other thing as well. So now we have interfaces and we have implementations. So one thing that we actually can do as well is to actually browse through either an implementation or an interface. So this is helpful. This is not really helpful in this case because everything is in one folder and there's just two. But if you have lots of dependency injection, and then if you have lots of projects already that has several implementations of a certain interface, it's very important that you are able to easily track or navigate to the implementation or to the actual interface. So let me just put that here and use test. So in this case, if you have to go to find out, okay, what's the implementation of this one, you can just either right click and go to implementation, or as per the context, the context menu suggests, you can go and control F12, and then it will take you to the implementation. But if you want to go to the interface, it's not really apparent here that it has an interface, but you can also shift it. Wait, sorry. Oh, but I think we have to use the interface here. So you can find all the implementation here. If in this case you have one implementation only, so in normal DI environments you don't really have a new here. So you just need to find if you are existing, if you have several projects that actually implements this interface, and then you actually have to find out all of the implementations of this interface. You either right click, go to implementation, or use right click, go to implementation or control F2. So in this case, there's just one. So what Visual Studio does is just navigate directly to that the one and only implementation. But if you actually create a new implementation, and then you right click here and then go to implementation, it will actually show search result instead. So it's sort of if it's just one, so why show this part, and then you can just go directly to. So in that case, so that's sort of a combination of the keyboard shortcuts already. And then so some just useful, so I've seen this, I think we've come across projects that has really large number of lines on one code, and then one useful tool is to actually the expand and collapse. So you can actually go to edit, or I actually just know the keyboard shortcut. So you can, if you want to open, or if you want to expand, so if you want to minimize all of the sections, so this includes the regions, the code blocks that has this expandable area here. So you can just click Control MO, and then if you want to expand them all, just Control M. And then if you have, so there's some tricky things when it comes to you when you're within a team that you are coding. For example, someone already committed a code that's not well formatted, and then you suddenly you formatted everything. So you'd have to it will sort of make that particular commit dirty. You won't be able to track what really changed on that one. So instead of just if I just control AFT here, it will format everything. But if I only want to manage the change in index or to just encapsulate or scope that change to here, I can just highlight, and then instead of control KD, I can use control KF. So it will just so any change that I did will just be on that particular method that I updated. So it's not going to, if I commit this, it won't show that hey you changed all of the file. So that's pretty much the one thing that I see the use for only isolating the format. And then another one. So in terms of when you're creating, I think this is one of the few I could call a sickness or negative things about IDEs. When you create a new file or anything, they just add everything. So in this case, if you have a new file here that I just created, a controller, it's okay. They have already the index, about, but most of you will just delete that. And then one thing that, but in normal web pages, they're useful. But this one's the usings. If you're really that OC, or if if you really don't need them in the code in terms of maintainability and readability, you end up seeing these gray things, and then there's just that you have to delete it. So the shortcut there is just to click Control RG, and then it will remove. So what will happen there? It doesn't just remove. So there's actually all of the keyboard shortcuts I'm showing is just accessible via the context menu. But for developers, for us developers, it's easier to do that via the keyboard. So right click, remove and sort using. So it's really not actually just removing the unused. If you actually there's some rules on how the usings are actually sorted. So they actually implement that. They have the rules specified underneath the compile or the removal process. So if you control RG, so you can see that in the models or the namespaces that are exclusive to the project will be moved to the top, and all system usings will be moved to the bottom. So this is basically so the refactoring also applies some of the code analysis rules that Visual Studio or the .NET has built in. So some of the rules are, it's already saying, so it already proved to us, or it already asked us to fix actually 3 issues within this scenario, or actually just 2 rather. So one, the first rule is there shouldn't be any using statements if you're not using them. Second is that all of the system using statements should be at the last part. So when you actually do the refactoring, it will actually do that for you already. Yep. And yeah, so in terms of all of those Visual Studio keyboard shortcuts, you can actually just check them online. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them are actually useful. And what's special about that is that you can still edit them. So if you're jumping across multiple IDEs, especially I think the trend right now is if you're developing lightweight applications, they already provided VS Code for that. And then you have Visual Studio, you can actually make them or have them set up a parallel keyboard shortcut definition. And in terms of that sharing in the format with different IDEs, so there's this new, I'm not sure if it's new, there's this concept called the editor config. So this comes into, for example, if you're a developer or a team of developers, and then there's a rule that all your indentation should be spaces and not tabs. So you can specify that, or you can ask all of your developers to just do that, and then some of them will forget, and some of them will just add spaces anyway. So there's this concept of an editor config. So the editor config is actually just literally a config file. So you add it on the root of your application. So in this case, this is an MVC application. You can just add the .editor config here. So just for reference, the editor config schema or format itself really has lots of different configuration that you can set. But again, that's just a standard, and then IDEs and other developers, they won't be able to comply with all of those. So in terms of specific to Visual Studio, only these ones are supported. So the indent style, this comes into play whether the indentations are, as I mentioned, a space or spaces or tabs. And then the indent size is the number of, so if you opt to use spaces, I think the one standard is 4 spaces, I think. But in tabs, I don't think you need 4 tabs to indent. So yeah, just 1 tab. And then you can then again specify the tab width. And then and then the other rules as well. So we'll just see how this will affect how I will code. And then just jumping a bit to the latter part. So once you have this, and then you actually pushed it to the repository, and then your other team developers get them or download them, then whatever the rules there, it will apply. So how will it apply? So let me just show you a sample. So let me just go back to a simpler class. This one. So if I specified in the editor config, so there's this rule. So in this case, what happens here, as you can see, this means that it will apply, so the root, it will apply to everything. And then there's a filter of whether it's CS or VB file. In this case, we're just using CS. And then there's some custom rules as here. New line before open brace. So it will actually implement that only for methods. As you can see here, I already did the factoring here. So as you can see, there's already an editor config, and then there's already a definition here that you'll only, or the editor will only insert new lines after an opening brace for methods. So as you can see, before I actually did the refactoring or the editing, the auto format, this one is violating that rule because this is not a method. So if I control KD or format document, only the methods will have additional line before the braces. And then it will also follow the indentation size. So it's we didn't change it. It will still be spaces. So that's the default. And then the size will be 4. So if I make it to 10 and save it, and then I actually, let me just, I think it's happening here when you insert the next line after the code. It's really very far already. So that's 10 spaces. Yep. And
so if anybody wants to have an argument about those previous spaces,
you just force it here. Yep.
Other than methods config, what else can you brackets in the editor config?
Actually have the page open. That's a good segue. Actually, we'll search that because I think that's a Microsoft thing. Let's go and search for that.
Not working.
See, it's not working. Yep. Yep. So in terms of the values for this one, so it's either the accessors. Scan. Ayun. I think we have. Yo. So there's some methods, a property. So some properties like the getter and setter accessors So they can be affected as well. But for this one, we're just using methods. There's also
Do you have a way to automatically format when you click on save the document? Kasi ngayon you need to press the shortcut in Control K. So you have a way na pag nag-save yung developer, automatic i-apply niya.
I don't think there's a hook for that. I think if there are hooks, it will be on build, but I don't think that will be very useful because you're already building. So yes, it might be an extension already. So hindi na siya yung you can configure on your own. So yeah, ito yung possible values. So the accessor anonymous methods, and then the methods each other. It's just a lot. So that's pretty much what the editor config is, and then there's an editor config site.org, so that defines the properties and everything. So as mentioned, this is a standard, and it's not really it's used by other IDEs as well. So it's just really a format of how they can communicate the standards for the team, for example, or the preferred look and feel of the code. So other than that, next one, actually after the editor config, or do you have any questions on the editor config before I proceed? Going once. Yep. So for the editor config, after that, so this one, this is actually pretty fun. So if you remember, who uses Newtonsoft JSON here? I think there's in C# or whatever JSON.
Everybody uses
yes.
it without knowing.
Yep. So one thing that I really hated about it is if you, as you mentioned, it's really very used, right? It's really common. So if you type it, if you want to use the parser or the serializer, whatever, you end up having an error first, and then you'll see that, hey, I missed this NuGet, so I'll just get it. So one thing that's in Visual Studio right now is that you can actually allow it to suggest a particular NuGet package instead of before just suggesting within the bounds of the project or the DLLs that it has. So it will also look for those that are in a repository or a NuGet repository, such as the public one. So sample of that one. So how you configure that is just actually go to the tools and then options. Since we're using C#, we just have to go to the text editor first, because that's where the magic happens, and then go to C#, and then you go to advanced. So there's a checkbox here. It's previously unchecked. I already checked it earlier. So using directives, suggest usings for types in NuGet packages. So they, just a caveat on this one, it's quite a lot in memory, so it's quite intensive because it actually checks for the references in the NuGet repository. So that's including all the DLLs there, whatever. I don't know how they defined it there, but so it takes a lot of, it will be eating a lot of memory. But if you click on that and then click OK, you can just go ahead and type on a class before you have JSON object. J object A equals null, for example. Yan, naka-10 pa rin yung so much for forcing now. Yeah, so once you have the, you can actually, wait, is it JSON? I don't think I'll just use NuGet here, but yep. So object yun, di ba? O JSON object yun. Yun. Hindi ito yun eh.
JSON convert.
Yes, JSON convert. Yung ano nila. Wait, I tested this earlier. But yeah, the idea is once you have a JSON there, yon. So JSON is hindi niya nakikita agad. Ninis ako dun sa 10. Shouldn't have done that. And, yeah, but the idea is if you have that, it will show up. So install Newton software. I'm not sure what's happening. Di pa rin. Kung ano na lang class yung nilagay. Yeah, anyway, yep. So did I uncheck that? I know I checked it. So yep. So that's pretty much what happens there. Is it will automatically install the package for you, and then yep. Tinry pa rin.
Wala.
Yeah.
Hindi nakikita.
So yeah.
Mali siguro yung class name natin.
Mali nga yung JSON object. Alam ko JObject yun. Oh, ayun. Never mind. Yep. And then yeah. So another one, I think. So that's pretty much just for easily, instead of spotting an error first because you thought Newton's of JSON was there already before or whatever. NuGet you were using. It will automatically be installed. And then, anyone here also familiar of conditional debugging in
Yung chart.
yes,
Diba?
yes. So no. In terms of the actual, you specify a condition. So
Chart if.
so let me just create. What ko nilagay mo? So previously, if you actually run this, and you added an actual breakpoint in your file. So let me just load this up. It's taking its time.
JSON convert and JObject needs Newton soft DLL.
Thank you. Yes, yan yun. Oo nga.
It should be.
It's taking its time. But yeah, previously if you have a breakpoint like this, every time you actually load the about page, it will just hit that breakpoint. So let me just show that for you. Really. It's waking up. Yep. So one thing there is, what if you're only expecting to this is not the ideal scenario, but if you're debugging a for loop, for example, and you only want to stop at 25 or for index 25, for example, and you're in a for loop, if you just use the normal breakpoint, you have to wait 24 times and then click on continue every time. So this one. So if you click on about here, what I'm talking about is that, oh wait, this one is not debugging. Oh wait, I didn't pass. Kaya pala. Yep. So every time you actually type, every time you actually go to the about page with the a parameter, you actually get the breakpoint. So just imagine that it's a for loop, and you want to, for example, you're reading a CSV file, and your hunch is that it's failing at starting at index 100. So you'll have to wait 99 times and click continue. So one thing to avoid that is to actually right click on the breakpoint and then conditions. So you have a condition here wherein there's a conditional expression. So you have an option whether it's true or when a variable is changed, etc. So we only want to hit the breakpoint if the A is actually, for example, greater than 50. So for example, and then you click close. So you can see that it's a conditional if there's a plus icon there. If there's not, if it's just plain or 100% red, it's just going to be hit every time. So since we're just using 5 here, it won't hit the breakpoint. If I get on 500, it will just hit the breakpoint. So that's not really the ideal code here, but in terms of when you're editing a for loop or debugging on a for loop or a while loop, and you have a hunch that it's failing at a certain index or at a certain item, so you'd have to follow. You can use the conditional debugging.
Can you, one line lang ba pwede mong execute using that condition or pwede mong set na?
If you have to set the breakpoints multiple times, you'd have to also set the condition, right? Condition multiple times.
So tatlong if A is greater
Yes.
than 50.
Well, if you want to jump through all of them, starting from, for example, from this line, if you break through here, you have an option to actually step through. So instead of actually defining, so let me again define that. A is greater than 15 na lang. So in this case, if we actually hit the breakpoint, which we'll do, you have an option to actually step through. So that, yeah, so if you want to go on and view what happens in the next line of code, you just click on F11 and then it will move. So you don't have to actually define the breakpoint every time. Because it will already start from this one. Unless it's on a different method, it won't jump to that one. But yeah.
Where is that in, is it in the F11?
No, the F11 is in the debug. There's an option to either step into,
Okay.
step over, or step out. Or something. Step over, you'll just move on to X plus 1. and then for step out, if you're actually, for example, if you're in a method here, you step out and then you move to the next after the execution of this code. So that's pretty much how the debugging works. And so that's it. So nothing special there. And then I think we can have one more. So the last one is actually the one I removed before because it was becoming annoying with all those underlines, and that's the point of that tool. It's to actually annoy you to fix the code. So it's actually called style cup. Anyone of you are familiar with style cup? Style cup. Yeah. So style cup is it's actually a code sort of a formatting tool. Yes. So what happens here is, as I mentioned, there's already certain standards of how the codes are actually formatted as per Microsoft or as per Microsoft standards. But it's not really 100% enforced. As you can see here, when I removed that particular NuGet package, we were not seeing the underlines anymore. Before it, there was just a bunch of errors. So one thing there is you just have to, let me just stop debugging first. And then you can go ahead and add a new package, NuGet, and then just browse for style cup. Yep. So, and then just install that. So once you're done with this, that's when all of the errors will be reported again. So what rules are we covering for this one? So for example, see, as you can see here, before I installed the package, the NuGet, there was no underline, there was no errors on this one. And then now there are. So one of the things that I usually hate or usually forget about this is that with normal Visual Studio, without the style cup, there's no problem placing your using outside. And then there's this, apparently there's this rule that when you enforce it, Microsoft defined that you should define your using statements inside the namespace. So in this way, the using will sort of be scoped only to this namespace. And then some of which, again, so there's a different rule, so reorder using statements. So as long as there are issues, it will be reported. So what are the... Yes, so apparently there, again, their rule is that for style cop, the system usings will be before all the others. And then one thing as well, I think I'm not sure what the debate, or if there are people who hates curly braces here or under, but for style cop, they want you to enforce it to the next line. Yeah, so all of these errors can actually be seen in the error list now. Wait, after you build. Yep. So, and one thing I hate as well about StyleCup, but it's fun using because it really enforces you to make your code more readable. You sell the most of the time we forget writing the this keyword, and as you can see that the reason why all of these are being highlighted because it's missing the this keyword. So, but it doesn't mean that these rules will be enforced forever for you, or you don't have an escape route. You can actually control. So these rules are actually the same standards that Microsoft defined. So they actually already have those rules in the project. It wasn't being enforced before in this way. So you have to manually trigger the code analysis. So you can go and open up the properties of the project, and then there's going to be a code analysis section, and then you can choose which rules to follow, the managed recommended rules or the default, and then you can open them and see the rules that are actually here. So there's a lot of yes. So for example, this one, if the using directive is unnecessary, like the ones we removed before, it will. This is the particular rule that says that that's not allowed. And then yeah. So one thing to note as well for StyleCup. So this is a NuGet package, but StyleCup in itself is actually a third-party application. In my previous work, we actually used that. It is included in the pipeline for the integration for the deployment. So it won't pass if we missed a this keyword. So that's how intense that was for. So and then we didn't actually change the rules, and it will actually ask you to remove the suppressed messages. So you can actually no, not that one. There's another tool that FXCup, and that one is looking at the compiled code, and the other one is looking at the code itself, the source code. So the FXCup is a different story because that's actually a different tool already. So what it does, it actually looks into the compiled code and sees and looks for optimization issues or whatever. So those two work hand in hand. Yeah, I think in closing for this, again, we've spent almost an hour on this one, and we haven't really reached all of the potential features that's in here in this 2R installation of an IDE. So there's still a lot, and I think what the key takeaway here is that we shouldn't be taking these features for granted. And then it's also always growing, especially that, as you can see, StyleCup is not made by Microsoft. It's actually just a third-party tool. And then there's actually a lot of tools, like for example, if you're a front-end developer here, you can, if you're using Font Awesome, you actually have to write FA. You have to look into the website what FA-something looks like. In this one, it will already show. There are plugins that when you type FA, it will show up already the icons. You can just type in there, and then it show, okay, this is the house icon. I can use it for the home link. You don't have to cross-check it to the home from the home page or whatever. So there's a lot of tools already available, and then even without those tools, Visual Studio itself also provides other quick or productivity help as well, in terms of how you will write your code quickly and how will you quickly efficiently manage your code. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today. Thanks everyone for listening, and if you have any questions, you can go.
Alright. Sige, let's open the floor for questions. May mga questions pa kayo about how to add your own or
sa code snippet, I remember you used yung dollar sign as a delimiter. No?
Yes.
What if you want to use to place dollar sign?
I think there should be an escape. May dapat meron yan.
yeah. Oh, $$
Yes.
lang ata yun. $$ lang yun. Usually. So I didn't know that you wanted you like the Egyptian phrases.
Oh, the ones.
Tawag nila the Egyptian phrases. Okay. Ito yung method nila, di ba? Egyptian phrases. Okay. Anybody have any productivity tools or sa kanila personally they like using pero hindi na share niya?
Specific, well, more useful siya for TI. If you're using a TI. Hindi ko sure kung built-in siya or I had to download something as a Git package. Kasi meron, for example, if you have, diba, usually if you have your service, tapos marami yung dependencies.
Okay.
So I have to type yung, declare yung mga read-only, whatever. Pwede mong gawin actually, select mo silang lahat, tapos right-click mo, generate constructor using codes.
Okay. Use the fields.
Yes.
Use the fields. So if you declare your fields, tapos right-click generate constructor, all those fields become a parameter for that.
Yes. So may mga this dot something equals that. Yung mga yun. Parating nagagawin.
Yeah, that's what is useful. Sa akin naman, if ako personal favorite ko, if you use sa search naman, if you do ito sa 2017, ito, yung control semicolon ba? Control D. Control D. Control D ba? Ano ba yung search? Yeah! I love this guy. I love this place. So this is my personal favorite of all productivity tools. If you have a project with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classes, yeah. So for example, I wanted to search for a class. Meron siyang diba? Meron siyang
Template.
filters. Filter na tingnan mo, lagay mo yung yan, yung question mark. Yeah. So here, symbols, line, show this list, files, members, types. So, halimbawa, preceded with the letter T, tapos, yan, lalabas lahat ng test. Or, halimbawa, T, tapos, gawin mo capital AT. Capital AT. Yan. So, kahit yung acronym ng test, ng objects mo, pwede mo hanapin. So, kung meron kang, HTTP of something, usually, yung shortcut pang hanap.
So, object searcher.
Object searcher siya. And
And
then,
enter mo.
Pupunta ka.
and then pupunta siya doon. Tapos, M. Yan. Kapag M naman na filter mo, methods lang yung niya. So, yeah, type anything. That's a constructor.
Hirap hanapin niya.
Mahirap hanapin. So, super useful siya kapag you have a super huge solution with thousands of members, thousands of fields, hundreds of classes, diba? Ang bilis na niya maghanap sa Visual Studio. So I love that particular productivity tool. Yeah. Tapos, yung property initializers, di ba, sa snippets?
Yes, yung prop.
So, there's two. Prop will give you an automatic property. And then propful,
We get it.
yung ganito. Yung merong kompleto na
Variable.
get set, yan. Which is, annoyingly, if you're still doing UWP, kailangan mo pa rin yan kasi lalagyan mo ng,
Listener.
on property change listener yung, mo dun sa get set. So, anyway, I'm just sharing my own favorite, productivity tools. Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions? Or other things that they want to share? Kayo, meron ba kayo?
So, debugging, pwede ka mag-time travel.
Time travel.
Time travel. So, di ba pag naka-breakpoint ka, may yellow arrow. Yung actually gagawin yellow arrow mataas. So, balik siya sa previous
Pabalik na.
Sara niya ulit yung previous statement.
Ano yung nun? Ano yung shortcut key? Shift ko siya.
Dinadrag lang yun.
Dinadrag mo.
Yung yellow na arrow.
May key ba yun?
Hindi ko alam, parang.
Ako yung conditional compilation, useful sa akin yun. Kunyari,
Ay, yung may
Yeah.
debug.
Super useful yan kapag yung loops na paulit-ulit ang daming, tapos ang hinuhuli mo lang yung isang, yung isang condition, isang very specific case lang.
kaya pag nag-debug ka ng console, di ba, may read line sa dulo para hindi mag-close agad.
Yeah.
Pero pag may condition, pag piniplan mo na ito production, wala yung read line nila sa to release, di ba?
Yeah. Ano lang naman yan? Debug that right line. Debug that read. Alright. Lahat tanong? Sigurado, sobrang nabusog doon sa pasta. Pasta pa rin yung iniisip eh. Alright, kung wala nang tanong, let's give it more. Bigyan for thank you very much. Okay, meron na po dito. Teka lang. Hanapin natin si Thea kasi pangalan siya sa akin.
Kenneth, thank you.
Salamat, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
May nag-donate dahil sa'yo.
Saan?
$2.
Yan. At dahil kayo ay pumunta dito on such a weird day, everybody gets a lanyard.
Wow!
Yay!
Laptop!
Laptop no? Saan na si Mark? Naka-service yun, no?
Service
Ang layo lang, yung slab sa pen.
So, teka lang. Kulang pa to eh. Kaya, hintayin lang muna natin yun. Yung jacket. Yung jacket. Yeah, teka lang. Hintayin natin. So, puro siya icons ng Azure. Yung design niya. Yung mga icons ng Azure. Sige. Iwanan natin doon sa non-click. Sige. Pakita mo yan.
Pumunta sila live dapat. May food na.
Lanyard lang.
Teka, meron pa ba dating? Mas madating. Meron pa ba dating? Meron pa dating. Meron pa lang. Di ba po kakantay pa? Teka lang. Ayan! Dapat! Ayan pa. Thank you. Okay. Sino pa wala? Okay na. Okay na.
Tagal ko na rin nakakita ng Azure na icon.
Yung ID sa
Bakit? Hindi nakakita ng Azure na icon. Alright, thank you very much. Alright, so we're probably going to have another session in November, and then December break muna tayo. Puro Christmas party yun eh, di ba? December. So yun. So please wait for our announcement for dun sa as usual sa meetup.com page saka sa PHINUG Facebook group for the next one. And for those watching online, baka mayroon pa tayong giveaways kayo din. So attend naman kayo. Alright. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this one session. Good night and alright.
Thank you, Microsoft.
Picture ka? Group picture daw.
Okay.
Eh, bako ba tayo? Yun, hindi ka na kasama. But everybody here.
Okay, may microphone daw.
Wala.
Ay, pictures.
Kanina wala yung close din.
Dami mo na slide.
Halata mong nang pinaghirapan. Yung mga speakers.
Teka, patayin natin yung blue na.
One straight line.
Sobrang straight naman, hindi magkasya. So, kasya ba? Alright. Alright, thank you very much.
Natanggal. Ba't hindi nakatapat to kanina? Go.
Ready na tayo.
Hindi siya naka-click,
Kailangan
hindi
na
siya
tayo.
naka-harap.
Ready na lang.
Okay lang. Kasi hindi ko ma-start eh. Dahil sa totoo, pagtaas ng camera. Hindi, or naka-light sa kagano. Okay lang, I think nakuha naman yung ano. Pero weird lang kasi, weird lang na naka-side. Baka...
Ay, wala na natin si Joe. Kaya niya na yan.
Bye, Joe.
Nakakam sila lang Joe. Joe.
Bibili ko lang tayo 5,000. 5,000 maybe. Okay. Ayun, magkasabay kami nito. Picture ba tayo? Ano ko eh,
Sige, Ken.
Ako na magkakontact sa'yo.
Yeah, sure.
Sinika yung nakausap mo.
Mika? Kanina?
No.
Before?
For booking this.
Si John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.